I am Madonna Swartzendruber, and I was born in a farmhouse south of Shickley to Lee and Emma Steiner. And I grew up in that house, and I lived in it all my life, except for 1 year when soon after I got married. We lived in Denver for a year because he worked out there. And then my husband and I moved into the farmhouse in which I was born because my parents had moved into Shickley. Well, a typical day in my life was as a farm wife, assisting my farmer husband, taking care of my children, 4 very active boys, and cooking and that kind of thing. For 65 years we were married, and then he passed away, and I moved here into Heritage in 2023. Well, Shickley's a small, friendly town surrounded by a community of farm families. It had a great school and a grocery store, an accounting business, a library, bank, places to offer insurance, a carpet store, and a store that served for irrigation needs, and many more that I can't mention. Well, I have many fond memories of living in the Shickley community. And bringing up one memory brings up many stories. There were 2 grocery stores in Shickley. Humphrey's was on the west side of the street, and J.A. Fisher's store was on the east side of the street, located where the bank now stands. And I remember going to Fisher's store when I was a child with my parents. Not only were there groceries there, but that's where we kids were taken before school started to buy new shoes. And my mom could buy dresses there for it was either $1.98 or $2.50. I can't remember for sure what the price was, but it was way under $3. And my dad could buy socks, and various other men's clothing was available also. When we went to buy groceries, we didn't pick up a grocery cart and go walk around the building and pick up what we wanted. But my mom would stand in front of the counter, and J.A. Fisher was on the other side with his tablet and pencil. And then my mom would look at her list and she would say, I need a bag of sugar. So Mr. Fisher would walk to a shelf, pick up the sugar, and bring it back to the counter. And then she'd give him the next item, and he'd walk to a shelf and get it and bring it back to the counter and write it down in his tablet with his pencil. There was no adding machine. And then when she finally had all she needed, he would bag it up. But usually I think they put groceries in boxes because they didn't have a lot of bags available like now. Definitely no plastic bags. But then he would add it up, tell her the total, and she would pay him cash. So that was the story of the grocery store. We didn't buy frozen items. They weren't available, but he did have a cooler, I'm sure, because we could sometimes buy minced ham. Oh, that was the biggest treat. Or even boughten, as we called it, boughten bread. It made a delicious sandwich, and we bought that only very rarely, because it was really a special occasion. And of course at home we had our own vegetables, our own canned goods, our own milk and eggs. So we didn't need much else from the grocery store. My father would go to another town with a load of wheat and have it ground into flour. And the flour was put in huge sized sacks. Some of the sacks were white and some of them were colored and printed, and they made me good school dresses. Everybody always talked about the flour sack clothes that were made, and we just stored the flour at home until it was time to get some more, and then he'd take another wheat down to that town. I also remember Winterstein's hardware store. The hardware store also had furniture upstairs. And in the hardware store, you could buy dishes and hardware, anything for your hardware. It was well stocked. But not only was it a hardware store and a furniture store, it was a mortuary. Carl Winterstein was a so-called undertaker. And when I was 13 years old, my 16-year-old brother passed away after a year's illness. And I can still remember my family gathered around his bed, watching him take his last breaths. Then he was gone, and we wept and we talked a little bit, and then finally my father went to the phone and called Carl Winterstein to come and get the body. And of course I remember that scene that followed as he carried him out the door. And then Carl, of course, did what you do before a funeral, and he conducted the funeral with the professionalism of the great mortician. So that was an interesting thing in Shickley, of all those services that were available. Then I remember the Ku Klux Klan. Have you heard of the Ku Klux Klan? Some of my childhood friends told me this story. I didn't go to Shickley and walk around the streets like the Shickley kids did, but they were walking around one day, and they came to an old church building which was no longer used. And of course they tried the door and it was open. So they went in and they looked around and explored downstairs, and then they noticed the stairway that went upstairs to the balcony. So up they went. And when they got there, on the wall hung a lot of scary looking robes and headgears. And they were so frightened they ran right downstairs and got out of there and never came back. But they later learned that it was the Ku Klux Klan's uniforms, and that's where they stored them. The Ku Klux Klan was really quite active and even quite hateful in those days in our little town of Shickley. And there were no people of color around, but for some unknown reason, they had such a prejudice against Catholic people, and they were really quite mean. But eventually, they dissolved. I don't know how long they were active, but that was one memory, those girls telling me that scary story. And then there was the store of Jack Cook, or John Cook sometimes called. He had the pool hall in Shickley. And my mother went to the pool hall once a year. And we always kind of teased her about it. But once a year, when she had to make dinner for a lot of thrashers who gathered together to help with the harvest, and she had a wooden ice box. I don't know if you've ever seen one or not, But you would put a big chunk of ice in this wooden box that was well insulated, and then that kept your food cool. And when we had these thrashers at the house, we had to keep some minced ham cool in it and a lot of other stuff, and we needed the ice. And so she would cook she would go into Cook's because that's the only place where ice was available. So she'd load us kids. My mom never drove a car, not regularly. But of course my dad was busy in the field, so she'd load us kids in the car and take us and park by the pool hall. She would go in, make her purchase, and Mr. Cook would bring out a big chunk of ice, and I think we'd put it in a big tub or something so it wouldn't drip all over all the way home, and bring it home and put it in the ice box. And then, of course, every afternoon she would have to make a lunch to take out to the men in the field. And so we used to sell cream, and we had big 5-gallon cream cans. Have you ever seen one? And she would wash that up real well and fill it with water and add tea, and then she would get a big hunk of ice from the ice box and put it in there. And we would take it out to the field, and she'd let us kids go along out there. And it was so much fun to watch these farmers take a break and enjoy sandwiches and cookies and delicious cold iced tea. The thrashing machine was kind of interesting too. These farmers would come with their fodder wagons, they called them, or big wagons, and load the bundles up from the field, which had been bundled up in the wheat field, like individual bundles. And they would bring these bundles into the big thrashing machine. They would toss the bundles into the machine, and out of one spout then, as the machine was running, would come the grains of wheat. Out of the other long spout came the straw that was on the bundle. And it made a huge straw pile, which was used then for bedding and different things along the farm. And so, but the family always had fun teasing my mom about going to the pool hall. I have a memory of going to country school, which was different than going to school in town. If there was one teacher in this little country school building and 8 grades. Now sometimes for lessons, the classes were combined, like first and second or third and fourth. And as each class was called up to the front every day for their lesson, and then a lot of times the kids who were still sitting in their chair, especially if it was an older class getting their lesson, we would listen to what was going on. And the younger kids learned a lot from the older kids as they were in their classes. And it was fun to watch them go to the blackboard and do math problems. And also, they would go to the board and diagram a sentence for grammar. They had a special sign to make, and they would put in the subject and the verbs and the adverbs and the adjectives. And that was fun to watch before the younger kids had to do that. Then, of course, at recess, it was fun to go out and play. And we played football and softball and a game called Pump, Pump, Pull Away. And we played 23 Skadoodle. And we just had a lot of fun. And for some games, we would have to choose up sides. And of course, I always hoped I wouldn't be the last one chosen. And I've always kind of been proud to say that I went to school with Rowan Kemp. I don't know if you remember him or not, but he was a very fast runner and a good football player. And he often chose me to be on his side because I was a good runner. Now, of course, this football was only touch football. We didn't tackle. But Rowan Kemp went on to be a very good football player in Shickley High School. As an 8th grader, I had to go to Shickley School and take 8th grade examinations. You could not graduate without passing that examination, and all the kids from the community, all the 8th graders, had to come in and take those tests. And these tests were given to all 8th grade students in the county. Well, then after you passed your tests, you were invited to Geneva to an auditorium where they put on a really impressive commencement ceremony. And awards were given to people who had especially high grades, but diplomas were given to all the 8th graders. I enjoyed Shickley High School. There were 9 girls in my class and 4 boys. Now, sometimes girls can be a little cliquey, but it was very unusual for 9 girls to all be really good friends, and oftentimes we'd get together for things and really enjoyed it. And the boys were friendly too. One of the boys in the class was Beano. Perhaps you know Beano now. He got his nickname when he was in class one day, and the teacher asked him a question, and he gave an answer that was way off, and it was about beans. And that was not a correct answer at all. But after that, all the kids called him Beano because of that strange answer he had given. And for the rest of his life, most everybody called him Beano, and he accepted it gracefully. And he was a great guy. He was kind and thoughtful and so willing to help with anything. If he saw something needed to be done, he did it. So he was a great guy. Well, there have been pretty many admirable people in the town, but one I always admired was Dora Jane Winterstein. She was kind and friendly to all. And first, she worked in her father's hardware store, and then for many, many years, she was the secretary in Shickley School. She was very helpful to all the teachers, and the children all adored her. And the parents could count on her to know that she would be willing to communicate with the children when they needed to contact with them and so on. And so I always did admire her. She was a wonderful lady. And the owners, there's many other people too many people to say that I admired, but she was one of them. The population in the Shickley community and the town has become smaller, as well as the school doesn't have as many students. Families have fewer children, and farms, because of the modern machinery, have become much larger. And several of the businesses in town have closed down, which is sad. But we do have a few new communities that have come in too. So in spite of all the differences like that, I think the values of goodwill have remained, and I hope they stay forever. Well, no community is perfect, but I hope that we can continue living up to the values that we now hold. I would like to see more of the college children come back to the Shickley community, and I would like to see more job opportunities in the community. I am confident in the future generation. Well, Shickley's a great place to live and raise a family. I enjoy my humble town of friendly people who work together. And if tragedy strikes, it's a wonderful community how they gather together and have fundraisers or do things to really help people or individuals who need help. I appreciate that a lot. And it's so wonderful that we can gather in the community center and do things as a whole community. I respect the business dealers for their honesty and their desire to really serve the public. And it's comfortable and commendable the way our churches work together now. There are several churches in the town and some in the community. And it's been very many years, I'm not sure when it started, but we gather together for pre-Easter services every year, and the churches take their turn hosting the other churches. And the churches get together and work together for other activities or duties like helping the community. Well, I've been happy here for all my life, and I've enjoyed my family and the town, the community, the churches. Why would I leave? Well, I am strongly connected to the Shickley community because of the spiritual influence of all the churches and because of the school, which has provided good grade school and high school education for me and my siblings, then my children and my grandchildren. And it's just a good place to be. I really love the schools, and I have lived 91 years in this great community. How could I not feel connected? Of course, I'm happy with my family and proud of my husband who provided well for me. I'm proud of my children, my grandchildren, and my great-grandchildren. And I'm happy and proud to be a citizen of the Shickley community. Well, the advice I've been given is probably the advice I would give. And that is, don't become discouraged. Remain faithful, love and forgive each other, and remember, God is in control. Well, I think I've talked quite a bit and pretty long, but I've really enjoyed you girls visiting me, and I enjoy thinking about my community, and it was fun to have some of these memories come back, things that I haven't thought about for a long time.